Hi, I'm Wallace, and I'm proposing a few questions that are driving my project. What is a tree when there are none? What happens when we have depleted our trees? We need to preserve the few we have left, but where do they go? Since our society is rooted in the industrialization, we can begin to see this process taking hold of our most important resources that give us oxygen. Like art pieces, only museums and the most wealthy institutions and research labs will have access, but would a tree be worth then a million, 10 million? Preserving trees in capsules, preparing them for research, reselling them to the highest bidder, and possibly transporting them to the potential lunar colonies as we tend to destroy one place and move on to the next. In this image, Japanese artist Azuma Makoto sent off the 50-year-old bonsai tree we saw at the beginning, among other plants, into the stratosphere inside a balloon and took pictures of this eerie but beautiful moment, a moment that won't last. As an overall scheme, in this preliminary speculative section are modes of exposure, thinking about how we perceive elements that are subvisible within the site, things as simple as tree roots, irrigation systems, and the tree growing process. Other, even more obscure elements like gravitational forces or the light refraction on translucent materials that are encasing the trees within the site. The trees are encased to protect them from human forces, rather than protecting humans from nature. What is the true ground? Is it solid? Is it elevated? Is it synthetic, like most of the coast of New York City? But what can lie within it? As our site is on the landfill area of Governor's Island, being so close to the water, it means that in 50 years our site will be flooded. How can we mitigate it, or do we just allow it to flood? As a sub-scheme in the circulation of the site, forming a network, while interconnecting all the layers from the speculative section, the circulation scheme is a meticulous process of a system that show pockets where elements emerge and allow the translucent materials and the tree canopy to appear and disappear through its openings. The site is a patchwork of different programs. Each of us have a different program that in the end creates an interconnected larger site on the southern point of Governor's Island. The programs are apiary, conservatory, oyster farm, food hall, and lastly my program, arboretum, tree nursery. The arboretum will create islands of tree canopies as they're elevated from the water but flooded by the river at around the year 2070. To allow the site to flood but also preserving the systems in place, the circulation will be fully elevated, interconnecting all programs by acting as structure. This will preserve the arboretum, like art pieces from salt water. The goal is not to accommodate the human population, but the trees instead, as we tend to put ourselves in a bubble when we create disasters. The ground's perforation helps in the flooding process, taking in more water than other sites, letting the underground flood as well. The nursery, research labs, and systems will be elevated above the expected flood level. The circulation is more like a catwalk, also carrying water systems across the site in an attempt to reuse water pooled on the ground. The arboretum will be the highest point in the site. The purpose of the project is to preserve the trees from humans, as we usually try to build architecture to protect us from nature. This is the opposite, so the accessibility of the site is more geared towards the elements water and trees. We have temporary accessibility that will be overtaking time, but still not rendering the process useless after major events. The infrastructures within the circulation and the trees are beacons like lighthouses in jewel-like states, also preserved from any flooding. The modes of exposure come into play the most in this section. The modes of exposure come into play in three ways. First, the synthetic ground is fractured, but tethered by pipes and mains. There's no hard line on where the ground starts or ends, allowing for a high degree of perforation, letting water pool up in between, inviting it into the system. Second, the exposure of roots and systems that feed the arboretum and the nursery. And third, the encasement of the trees, but still allowing light and research to be done as specimens and priceless works of art. All of the crucial working systems are way above the 2070 projected sea level rise to last at least over 100 years. Humans have a way with taking part in manipulating every aspect of nature. Starting at the far end of the site in the nursery, prepping the trees to grow, we graft them to create the perfect tree, with a perfect branching structure, which is a common process used in nurseries now. The underground is accessible throughout the site, with light coming through the apertures above. The synthetic chandelier-like earth, which is interconnected, allows for viewing of the heart of each tree above, since it's something usually obscure to us. Coming from the nursery on the left, the trees get inserted into a shrink-wrap pod, ready to be transported towards the middle conveyor and out at the far end of the site. The infrastructure is vital to the assembly and transportation of the trees, always keeping them enclosed, sequestering them from humans. The trees exit the site by stacking, and in the case of being flooded, it can still be accessed by boat as the infrastructure is elevated from potential water. The assembly line speaks to how we continue to commodify nature and where we'll end up. The tree pod from the assembly line is shrink wrapped and encased, preserved until it's purchased and unwrapped at its destination. Not many will have the privilege to afford a tree like this, but who will have access to this rare specimen? The trees above aren't accessible to the public, but they're closely monitored by the research lab that's located in the middle of the site, monitoring the health of each tree through the root systems above. The large tree that rests above are the jewels. Older and rare, they are only seen on site, not available to purchase. Experienced from below and monitored at all costs. The roots are exposed to inject nutrients more directly into the tree, as the preservation is the most important aspect of the arboretum. Thank you.